Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Gravity Circuit. In the last part, we went after the cooler circuit blade, and now it's time for our 7th of the 8th Rebel circuits. We're heading on over to the city center. Large speakers have been installed all over the city by the virus army. They are emitting loud, deafening blasts, trapping civilians all over downtown. And if that wasn't enough, a giant billboard depicting Medley has also appeared. Just as playful as ever, she's clearly toying with us, inviting us over. Normally we would ignore such distractions, but civilians are at risk. So go out there and put an end to her little stunt. And when you see her, could you get her e-signature for me? I'm a big fan. Take on this mission? Very well. Prepare for transfer. This is one of my favorite stages just to kind of blast through, honestly. With that said, while I love blasting through this stage, on a first playthrough, this is probably the one you should really take your time on the most. If I had to compare it, it's sort of like if they combined Springman stage from Mega Man 7 with a little bit of some very minor mechanics from the Voltron boss fight in ZX Advent. We got these speakers all over the place that every now and then will emit a sound wave that can damage you. In fact, actually getting through this stage without getting touched by one of those is the achievement for this stage. There are, I believe, 3 different colors in them, and they go off in the order of blue, red, yellow, with red in the center. And even though that order doesn't matter too much in the long run, it's only really a couple rooms it really comes into play, keeping it in mind will still help you get past the order of obstacles. But also, we just outright have springs. A second after you step on them, you get bounced upwards. I believe they're all the same strength. The color difference is just depending on what platform they're on. But there's times you're gonna need to use them to either get around spikes themselves or get off of them to avoid the spikes. So analyzing your situation around you is going to be your best friend here, which is why I recommend taking your time here on a first run rather than trying to rush through it like I'd like to. Also, without a doubt, I think this stage actually has some of the hardest hostages to rescue, not so much for finding them, more just the actual process of rescuing them in some cases. Because the springs themselves are predictable for when they go off and all that, but the control when you get flung up by them gets sharp enough to a point of being a detraction, because it's very easy to accidentally overcorrect yourself and fall into or get pushed onto a spike you didn't expect to. They don't do a lot of bouncing you between 2 layers of springs, though, like in Springman stage. I won't be surprised if that's in the Master variant of this stage, though. Again, I've yet to play that. There is one other mechanic, I guess 2 other mechanics to note in this stage. For one thing, we're going to have these blocks coming up that look a little evil. Whenever they get touched will then sprout spikes, whichever one of the 4 sides it's on. This can be enemies activating it, but it's usually either you running across it or jumping off of them on the walls that'll do so. So you need to make sure you're actually dedicated to your wall jumps and actively climb as fast as you can rather than trying to hesitate on them using that one specific chip in the case you have it equipped. And even though I've never gotten hit by doing this, the grappling hook can also activate these blocks, so watch out for that in the case you're swinging too close to a ceiling off of them. Even though there's not many times where they're on the ceiling off the top of my head, still keep it in mind. And here's the final of the main mechanics for this stage. You ever play Astro Man stage from Mega Man and Bass? Because it's something out of there. We got these checkerboard panels that whenever you step on one of them, there's sometimes just a hidden platform on them that has spikes below it that'll rocket you upwards. Usually up to spikes, and sometimes you need to avoid stepping on them to not get hit. Other times it's just jumping off them at the right time. Honestly, it's not too dangerous. It's one of those that sounds more dangerous than it actually is, which kind of describes this stage in particular. Rushing and description is more dangerous than it actually is in practice, although this swinging room can be a little rough. Notably, talking about the grappling hook again. If you're grappling onto a speaker, like the one on the right side of the screen or this one right here above me right then, and the sound wave comes out of it, that does knock you off of it. You don't take damage from it knocking you off directly, though. It's only if you fall into a spike or pit that it'll do that. Now, one of my favorite little details about this particular stage is the higher we get in it, the longer we're in it. The background in the outside sections actually transitions from a sunset into a nighttime sky, and it's a very minor detail, but I love the look of it. Again, this game is just gorgeous. Some of my favorite sprite work I've seen in the last good while. And the animation work being as good as it is on top of that is really nice. To talk about Medley herself really quick, though, since we talked about all the other Rebel circuits with this last time that we had covered at that point. Her name is just an outright reference to the term medley, which is a musical term for songs made up of smaller chunks of other songs. Think every Sonic credits theme on the Genesis from memory. And I like medleys a lot, especially if they're good about feeling triumphant. Meanwhile, her title as the Wave Circuit is a reference to just the term waveform, which is a very broad term that's used in digital audio interfaces to describe what audio looks like. Heck, looking at my editing software, I'm looking at one right now for my commentary track. Also, wait a second, I see your bias, your domesticated ant games, 2 Robo-Pups and no Robo-Kitty. Shame, shame. Now, I actually am making that room a little harder on myself. There are several times in the game where when you finish a harder platforming section to get a hostage or a power-up, there's often a shortcut that you can slide under or break a wall down to get back to the main room for. Right to the right of that Robo-Pup, there was a wall I could break that just blends in enough to me that I always miss it. I genuinely think I've only remembered to get that shortcut the once during a playthrough, and that was the practice run for this very stage before this LP. Whoops. Now, something I think this game's a pretty good indicator of when it comes to this game's level design. There's not many times where a fall will actively cost you that much time in terms of non-hazard falls. Because whenever they do vertical sections like this, largely the level design combs back and forth often enough in an interesting enough way with what the level has that it's more like you're playing a left to right horizontal section just up and down rather than a proper elevator sequence or especially not a Yoku block segment for Mega Man. By and large, anytime you fall down, you're like not even 5 seconds away from getting your progress back. It's probably just a missed jump that you have to redo really quickly. Because that is a trap I think some games get into with their vertical levels. And not that that's a problem, but when there's too many of those in a row, it can be kind of... I'm not going to say irritating. That's not the right word for what I want to say here. I guess dread is the right word for what it puts into my soul, at least. I immediately think of certain Donkey Kong Country levels with that, but also certain classic Mega Man levels, especially whenever Yoku blocks are involved. Up this wall is our final hostage for this particular stage, but there's still one more thing we have to find in this stage. We still haven't found this stage's palette chip, because I think out of all the core 8 stages, it's probably the latest one is placed. And it's also one of the hardest ones to get, because we have to do swinging across the speakers, and like I mentioned, if you're on a speaker when its sound starts getting emitted, you just get ejected off of it immediately, so you need to be a little careful. It's weird, the swinging in this game feels fine if a bit over sharp at points, but when it's over a shorter distance, I think it's actively harder than if it's over a longer distance. If only because it's easier to get into the groove and the rhythm of it over a longer distance. Not the hardest swinging section of the game, though. That goes to one specific section in the final level we'll talk about when we reach there in several parts. For now, though, time for the Rebel Circuit. What's this? Did my performance lure in a fan? Oh, how exciting. Would you like to get my e-signature, handsome? I wish it were that simple, Medley. Those speakers of yours need to go. Always a killjoy, aren't you? Always acting so high and mighty without a spark of joy in you. You really need to let go and have fun sometimes, you know? So, how about a dance? Medley is a surprisingly defensive fighter when she's not jumping around and creating sound waves along the floor. She can spin dash away or towards you, which will just do damage outright. She can fire a note that can bounce along the ground that can also set off the springs in the ground that potentially mess up where you're going. She can spawn in a speaker near you to do damage outright, but she can also spawn a wall of them between you and her to prevent you at getting at her. Her burst technique can be a little rough to dodge. She'll jump to the middle of the screen and spawn 2 walls of speakers randomly around the screen, and then do 2 jumps in a row that create the waves. Usually the safest way to dodge that is to either be right next to her and see where the speakers spawn in, or be at like just one of the 2 extreme walls. Otherwise, you're probably gonna get hit by that, honestly. And there we go. Did you like my performance? Left you speechless, huh? How very flattering. I hope it was a worthy distraction. I can't quite place why, but I really do like rushing through this stage. Between the bounciness of the music, the rhythm-based mechanic, or just the boss fight itself being a bouncy fun fest, I love playing through this stage. It's probably one of my favorites to revisit in the game. Good work out there. The speakers throughout the city have gone quiet. Those tunes were pretty catchy, but it had to be done. Let me know when you're ready to tackle the next mission. Alright, let's do our usual shot blap. So Medley's palette chip's an interesting one. It turns your jump into a physical attack. You do the spin animation, and you will now damage things directly around you. And it's good for smaller enemies from my memory, as well as keeping up some combos on boss fights. But it's just unruly enough for me that I don't like using it too much. It's a little bit like the top spin from Mega Man 3. From the nurse, I'm getting the frame amplifier, which increases your regular attack speed, and the speed basher, which generates a shield that can damage enemies whenever you're dashing or sliding with it equipped. That one's not too bad if you're trying to just dash through things, honestly. Ah, you've been busy. I heard you confronted the wave circuit. Medley always was the playful type, fooling around on the job. Her primary duty was to handle communications, but she just couldn't help herself from putting on a show every so often. This often led to work getting done slower, as you might expect. Not that anyone minded, her cheery spirit was hard to stay mad at. "Cheer up, no need to be so glum," she would always say. Oh, I think that's enough reminiscing about the past. Medley's burst techniques are pretty good, honestly. One of them is actually one of my favorites, the cycle kick. But also you got the surface render. The surface render, you slam below and you send waves out either direction for you. The cycle kick, though, you stop your horizontal momentum to do a spin kick that you can control in any direction for a couple seconds. And it can be really good for building up combos against smaller enemies, larger enemies, and bosses alike. I like this one a lot. I replaced the flying strike with it. I'm actually not sure if it gives you more horizontal distance. It at least feels like it does to me, but I might be imagining that. And also, we got another Robo Puppy that we can once again pet the dog. Notably, this doesn't get you a compendium disc. I think petting one of the dogs gets you the compendium disc for both, because they share one. But for the first time in the LP, we're actually going to do 2 stages in one part, because the next stage is short enough that I don't mind. So, only one Rebel Circuit left, and though the first one we saw at the very end of the intro stage, it's time for us to head over to the power plant. The city's main power plant has been seized by the Virus Army. If that wasn't bad enough, the Rebel Circuit Cable has been sighted in the area. With him around, there's a risk he might destroy the main generator. We ourselves can survive with our backup generator, but the city streets would look awfully dark during the night. Take on this mission? Damn right. Very well, prepare for transfer. This was one of the first stages I tackled on my first playthrough because it actually reminded me of Fuse Man from Mega Man 11 just from the visual aspect. I love that boss intro theme so much. God, I love that each character gets their own unique one for that, and their boss intro for the actual boss theme. So, when I first played the stage, my first thought immediately went to Sigma 1 from X1 because of the way the platforms are at the very start of it. So this stage's mechanic, of course, it's a power plant, so we're gonna have electricity to deal with. But in specific, everything that's green is technically the electricity. And anything that looks like that little gray section on the floor coming up here, if electricity touches that, it entirely becomes an electric hazard. So, a part of this level is realizing when you're supposed to jump off a platform on top of when you can jump onto the next one, as they might be electrified and counted as a hazard. So, Cable. His name is derived from the same thing both on his title aspect and his actual name. Power cables, because every computer and device needs one in some form. Hence his name is Cable, and his title is the power circuit. And I should note, I'll probably have already stated as much, probably in like a second pass text box that I usually put on screen nowadays. But every single one of these, I found the actual source. It was Domesticated Ant Games who said it, but in specific, it was a post in their development Discord, apparently, which, yeah, that about makes sense. I made a couple of those for various games myself, although I don't really read in them too much because I'm very much a lurker in a lot of Twitch chats or Discords, just to be like, yeah, I'm here for the updates, and if there's a direct poll that needs answering, because when there's a lot of people around like that, I start to just get nervous about talking. I'm bad about that. There's the palette for this particular stage, and there's actually the easel that has the hazard sign that Prim mentioned she was making when we first met her. They do some really cool stuff throughout the stage in terms of what can electrify the various platforms, though, as sometimes it's the direct lasers we saw earlier. Sometimes it's these green enemies that will spew out electric bursts directly at you. Sometimes it's the one that sends them out in a spread. They do some really cool stuff with it, and the actual placements of it make for varied versions of the same hazard in ways I find interesting. I think this is one of the better design stages in the game in general. With that said, the hostage we just saved, the way we have to access them always specifically reminds me of Stone Man stage from Mega Man 5, and is specifically the version of it from the Game Gear game that's sort of a best of Mega Man's 4 and 5. Just the way that the specific thing you have to break to reach him on top of you needing to slide through it just reminds me of that one specific stone wall in that stage. Which is weird, because Mega Man 5 is not a game I really think about that often. It's not my least favorite NES entry. It used to be when I was much younger, when I even started the channel. I even remember being kind of weirdly vitriolic towards it for some reason. But nowadays, it's good. It's fine. Really cool boss fights, some good weapons. It just isn't the one I think of a lot. I think nowadays my least favorite of the NES games is probably 3, but mostly just for the back half. I love the main 8 Robot Master stage. It's the Doc Robot stuff that I think it just is a kind of a slog to go back through nowadays. The only reason it's not 1 is because 1's the first entry, and I give it a little more leeway because of that. Now, seeing this enemy type reminds me, there's actually a burst technique that can basically instant kill them that you can get from the start of the game that I've basically never used in it. And that is the Heavenly Pile Drive. The Heavenly Pile Drive is you dash forward and you suplex them, and there's even a combat input you can do that I think gives you a special cutscene that I've basically never been able to successfully do because it's kind of tight. That'll effectively instant kill them. For most of the LP, I didn't talk about it. I actually used a sort of cousin of it you get around the same time called the Catch Interrupt, where you activate a counter stance, and if you're hit during that by an enemy, you hit them backwards for major damage. If you look back earlier in the LP, whenever I'm fighting like Ray or a lot of the earlier Rebel circuits, I think I still have it on right now, whenever I punch an enemy and they get flown backwards while spinning, that's me using that because it's nice to have around as a panic button in the case I'm about to get hit by an attack and they're right next to me. Because I think even just touching them with it, even if they're not attacking, will trigger it. It doesn't work against projectiles, though. That panic button's very useful to have around, especially if you're lower on health. There are probably safer methods, but hey, it's nice to have that uh-oh thing around in the case you're really low, especially if you aren't picking up the upgrades. Because if it does more damage to them and saves you, hey, that's worth it to me. The only real downside to the Catch Interrupt is that it's not very good as a combo option because it's effectively an automatic combo meter max out. But again, given I use it more as a defensive way to do damage, it's worth it to have around in my eyes. That's what I really like about the burst techniques in this game. There's very few I'd say are completely useless, but there are enough that you can probably find your very comfortable playstyle very easily within them. The only downside is because you unlock them after a boss fight, you don't know which ones you're going to get in the first playthrough. But even then, that allows you to like get comfortable and learn, maybe grab ones that sound interesting to you, and if they don't click, hey, they don't click. And here I am again, ignoring the easy way out from the areas. Oh no, I remember this time. Good! Now, we've already talked about the game's main developers for the most part, barring some people on the QA team and special thanks. But I do want to quickly shout out the publisher of the game, which is actually two publishers just sort of not at the same time, which is PID Games and Plug-in Digital. PID Games, PID stands for Plug-in Digital. Plug-in Digital itself is the parent company, which is a publishing arm, whereas PID Games is a sub-name within that Gravity Circuit is more directly published under. Both are listed just because of people from both arms of it working on the game in some form, usually as some sort of brand manager or producer, all that, like, and I'm probably going to say some of these names wrong because a lot of them are French, and out of all the European languages, French is probably the one that's hardest for me to grasp on the pronunciation level. Stanislas Junpeirat was a brand manager and producer. Matthew Huchede was the assistant product manager. Associate producers Louise Terriers. Release managers Arnaud Vergne. Senior product managers Vincent Lejamtel. And communications officers are Noemi Siyari and Apuria Saini. They all worked on a lot of the same games on their own stuff, and it's usually all the same roles as we saw here. They're all from PID games in specific, and games they all share things like Cassiodora, Vernal Edge, Ellipse, Vis, Roto Force. Arnaud Vergne and Vincent Lejamtel are probably the most storied people in there. Vincent in specific has been a social media manager on a lot of Assassin's Creed and Just Dance stuff, whereas Arnaud is a former Ubisoft employee as well, working on like Rayman Legends. So, you finally came. Cable, step away from the main generator. The city needs it. That worthless town. What exactly do you wish to power there? The Guardian Corps' pathetic defense systems. Giving me the cold shoulder, huh? Very well. Let's get on with it. Cable's got a lot of small variations in the same moves, usually involving using either the blade on his arm or shooting pellets out of his other hand. The electric pellets can go out in spreads directly at you. He can fire lasers down from the ceiling. All of his attacks in some form will electrify the part of the platform he lands on, though, which is the thing you really need to watch out for, because that means he can do damage to you even from a distance in a way that's pretty unusual for the rest of the boss fights. His burst technique, though, is to rain down lasers that hit the entirety of one of the steps of the platforms at a time, moving from the outside in and then back out. So you need to be a little bit on your toes to dodge that properly. Not too bad, but he can be pretty chaotic, and if you come in with a lower health amount, he could be a problem. So be it. The generator's yours. It doesn't matter what you do with it. There can be a lot going on in this stage, which is why I wouldn't really recommend it for a first choice, but it's another one I actually really like. Mind you, there's very few stages in this game I actively dislike. Just Cable himself can be a harder boss than some, so it might not be the best choice for that for a first stage. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in Part 8, now that we've gotten all 8 Rebel circuits, it's time for some cutscenes. See you guys then.